or visit heartdrop.com or find us on Amazon.
Extend your life with Extendovite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hey there, promos are running, so mute. Shh.
Stumbling down the road with Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff as she carries stones, digs holes, and wheels her shovels on her way. This road is the real path. It is never easy and never clear, but always entertaining. This journey has not been a seated event, as Bridgette walks, runs, stumbles, carries, digs, drags, laughs, fights, sings, prays, dances, kicks, screams, and oftentimes falls.
Hello.
Oh, there you are. I was like getting worried. I thought I was going to have to call you back because we know that your Skype is always kind of, an iffy situation.
I was just actually looking at it, wondering if I'd lost you or not.
Yeah. All right. This is good. All right. So anyway, this is Gordon Esau. Gord's one of my good friends that I talk to on a regular basis, and he resides in beautiful British Columbia. So I told Gord, I told the listeners that I twisted your arm and made you come on this week. So, yeah. So I'd just have like a conversation with Gord. Usually, Gord, if we talk on the phone, we can have phone calls up to like 5-6 hours long. So I figured, he'd be good to bring on the show since there are lots of things that we talk about. So, I just want to, because I'm a total X-Files cuckoo-doo. And I started watching them, back in the 80s. And then I just noticed, because I don't have TV, I do not have a TV. I'm house watching, and they have a TV, and they have Hulu. And so Hulu had, the season 10, which had 6 episodes, and then season 11 that has like 10 episodes. And so I was really excited about getting to see the season 11. So I'm like halfway through it. But it was a really weird thing because they've, they're really big about chemtrails. Did you see season 11, Gord?
I don't think I have.
Yeah, I don't think you have either. But anyway, it reminds me of a lot of their, like, they didn't miss a beat, like their old, their, where there's some tongue-in-cheek in it, sometimes. But they had, they've modernized it. They talk a lot about chemtrails in it. It'll pop up here and there, and it's serious. And I think, there's some, like gossip or rumors that, the X-Files was basically shut down in 2001 because there was some presidential stuff. I guess, I can't remember if it was before the World Trade Centers came down that they asked that the X-Files be.
I think they did an episode after that. At least one anyway, probably more. They film in Vancouver.
Right, but I mean that they did that 6-episode one in 2016, which was they're calling season 10.
Right.
And then now they're back. It seems like they're back doing, the long versions with long episodes, kind of in the same format. But anyway, on the new one, it was a total shocking. I watched. I can't remember what it was called. It was one of the first 5 episodes. But anyway, so they have this episode where they're getting a call from one of the 3 underground guys that they had on the show that, died. Krolicki, or I forget what his name is in the show. But anyway, he keeps showing up on their phone. He's virtual. And that they find out that that after he made a pact before he died with his girlfriend who's a professor to have their consciousness uploaded into a virtual system so they could sort of live forever or whatever. And so he was stuck there, and he was doesn't know if he's alive. Then he finds out he's not alive, that he's virtual.
Are you a Smoking Man?
Huh?
Are you referring to Smoking Man?
No, this is Krolicki or Licky Richard. He plays one of the 3 tech guys, the techie guys from the other seasons.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, so it's one of them, and so he keeps showing up virtual video on Mulder's phone. And so he goes in and he tells them, we're stuck in here. He said it was pretty cool in the beginning because the Ramones played, they play every night here in the virtual reality. He indicates that there's a lot of other people stuck in that virtual reality, computer generated.
And that's how it starts out, is Mulder being reality?
No, Krolicki.
Oh, guy.
Richard, yeah. And he's on Fox's phone trying to talk to him. And so he's sort of telling him about the virtual world that they're stuck in. And so they go on a mission to actually shut down the servers and the system to kind of free their consciousness. And during the show, you find out that they can use cell phones to extract even small pieces of your consciousness and actually hold hostage. And there's this plot to actually get as many of the chosen people, because you hear this, in this one episode, it's constantly the chosen people, who they're chosen and who are not the chosen. And so kind of more of the chosen people are kind of signed documents to have their consciousness uploaded, but they could do it without will or approval in the show. Anyway, it's a trippy show. And and so they eventually get in there, and Scully's breaking this master server, trying to release them, and she thinks that she's got them released. And then Richard, the techie guy, he ends up briefly phoning back and saying, on the screen, you didn't get the backup hosting, you didn't get the backup system, so they're still trapped in this unit. So anyway, it was kind of a trip, because I watched that one last night and I was like, whoa. I mean, that takes gang stalking to a whole other level. And this is the thing, is watching the X-Files when I was young, they told you about every single thing going on. The only thing that they only briefly in the last seasons talked about was so brief, were the chemtrails, but there was just it was brief, and I think it was one show, where now they talk about them a lot more, especially into the 11th season. But I'm thinking, that, this whole thing with this virtual computer system, so if we So this is my belief. This is what I've seen, and this is what I've experienced, right? And so heaven, I call it the heaven experience. And basically, it's a tractor beam. This is the part I think people kind of miss, because we have this like really dualistic, polarity thinking. And some of this stuff, bypasses our critical mind. But if aliens, usually abduct people and ship, lots of people get hypnotized, lots of people remember, being pulled into the light, the tractor beam, and then, lifted up and brought on the ship or wherever they want to take you. But yet people believe like the light and the tractor beam for heaven is something, like completely different, because they don't have critical thinking. We have this really separatized thought process where we can't put the pieces together somehow. And so we're on the seesaw. Anyway, so basically they pull you up in the tractor beam. You can't control yourself. You can't control your thoughts. You can't control your own mind, right? The aliens or whoever is pulling you up in these light tractor beams are totally in control. They experiment on you and they tell you things and whatever else. So the heaven experience is the same exact thing. You've got the light, which ends up being a tractor beam because it's a tunnel, and you can't not go towards, wherever the light's coming from. So you're being beamed aboard into some kind of structure. And then they give you, it's computer generated, the heaven experience. They say that, ET stuff, information, conversations that I've had with what I think are extraterrestrials. And so the heaven experience is like it's a computer generated experience. So when you're going up in the heaven experience, and they say that it used to, it's probably faster now. They can trap you within 15 minutes after you physically die. They can hone in on you because, even your energy body has its own signature. And then, they pull you into the light tractor beam up. And in order to calm you down or, appeal to you to get you to go where they want you to go and have an experience, they'll give you whatever experience that you need. You'll see Jesus, you will see your family members, maybe you'll see a pet. And these things encourage you and make you calm and more peaceful. Some people go before the, master group, the master council, which is horse pookie as well. And then what they do is that once they can get a hold of you, they basically fry you and blow your circuits basically in your energy self. And they put you what's called an electronic prison, and they hold you there to reincarnate you back into the planet. And eventually you won't have a soul left, right? Because that's the battery that is, plugged into their system, right? That runs it. So every time you reincarnate, you lose more and more of your energy body. And so eventually you won't exist anymore, even on kind of a spirit level. So I was thinking like, this X file about them, being able to upload you even by a passerbier's phone. On the episode they were talking about how, they could just be near somebody and use their cell phone or their cell phone to upload parts of their consciousness, part of it or all of it or whatever else, and then hold them kind of captive in that server. And the thing that came to my mind was like, oh my God, they have taken it to a whole other step further. Why not just steal the consciousness while the people are sort of alive, or get them to agree to just, upload their full consciousness as soon as they die into their machine and their program. Because that's basically what we have now. but it's more 3D, right? It's more like they're trapping you in the 3D. So, no one escapes. Because I'm sure, like with the Tibetan, they have like the Book of the Dead, and they've been practicing forever. I mean, some of the shamanism practices, like from South America, can go, easily be dated back 10,000 years. And they knew a long time ago, like how wacko this system was and how crazy it was. And as they became like more conscious, and then they apprenticed and passed it down, more and more, and it was seen and exposed. And so they learned how to do physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual type practices so that they could, remove their body and their spirit and go through between timelines. And so then they could not really incarnate when they wanted to, but walk in and out of this, world, layer, dimension, whatever you want to call it. And so they do the Book of the Dead, and they do, from what I've heard, really traditional, like Tibetan Buddhism. They do, like, I think it's like either 60 or 90 days of chants, and they do different kinds of chants every day to lead the spirit of their other, monk that has passed away, so that they can lead them every step of the way through the obstacle course, the heaven experience obstacle course, so they can get past that, onto the other side to be clear of it. And then they usually incarnate, at will. They don't come back in their bodies, because this is done after the fact. And I'm sure that there are Tibetan monks out there that could be like 10,000 years old, still running around in their physical bodies. So, anyway, stranger than fiction. So anyway, what do you think about all that, Gord, about how they could just be uploading, it's hypothetical, obviously, because there might be people listening who this is kind of upsetting information, but hypothetically, they could just, take part of your consciousness. And so with gang stalking, they've been known to use phones to get people's brainwave activity by getting close enough to them, their personal, like, signature.
Well, initially, my thought was, as you're describing the new X-File episodes, is it sounds to me like they're bringing in elements of the Matrix into the show.
Oh, yeah, totally. No, and yeah. And then they also not only are bringing it into the show, but connecting it back in the past, too. There might be these blurps back from, seasons before, or, blurps of historical events that happened on TV. So they're actually going, they're showing it how far it goes back.
And also the movie Jupiter Ascending is considered one of the most revealing movies on what's going on in outer space.
Yeah.
And
that has a lot to do with the food, though, us being used as food.
Well, that too, right?
Yeah.
But you get all the elements in there with what we read about, right? With the reptilians, the whole 9 yards is in there.
Yeah.
And the battle to essentially free humanity from that grip is sort of the theme of the show. So that's, I think, how they kind of trickle this information out to us. They're kind of prepping the brain so we're not too shocked when we step up into that stratosphere and get plucked off or whatever. I had some other thoughts as we're going through there, but they sort of dropped off already. I think there's a lot of things that are coming up that humanity is just being prepped for to accept. People who study more deeply into the esoteric, you mentioned Tibet, and that kind of rang my bell on the suppression of information on the Romanian Hall of Records. And I don't know how much you've read on that, Bridgette, or not. I know I've brought the topic up with you before. That's gotten totally suppressed. You go online and try to dig up, and you'll get real namby-pamby information on that Hall of Records in Romania. And for the people who are listening, are not aware of that, this was discovered, how many years ago now? Seems like a long time. It's several years ago when I first started seeing information on it, and it was really prolific online at the time. And the Hall of Records is it's essentially, that's what it is. It's right embedded into the mountains. I think they're called the Carpathian Mountains and it connects into from Romania into Central Europe, Eastern Europe rather. Sorry. What goes on there? There's the Sphinx head at the top of that mountain. It's pretty much identical to the head of the Sphinx that we see in Egypt. And that exiting out of that facility, and there's 10 tables. These tables are 2 meters high, so tall people used them in the past. And what you can is just using the palm of your hand, and there's symbols carved into stone on these tables. And you can put your hand, and the closer you put the hand, the greater the amount of information on whatever symbol that you put your hand over. And it'll bring up, you can go back, I think it's 500,000 years into the past. You can bring up information on there. And it's what it suggests is it's very much ET orientated. Now, out of that hall, there's tunnels that go out of there, and they've identified a tunnel that goes down under the Mediterranean. It's supposed to come up underneath the left paw of the Sphinx. There's also a tunnel that travels east, and it dips down a little bit because there's a similar facility north of Baghdad in Iraq, and it's one of the reasons the Americans went back. It is for that, and that tunnel, it dips down to that facility, but it also carries on all the way to Tibet. Caesar, I think, is the proper name for the archaeologist who is the initial finder of this Hall of Records in Romania and opening it up to get into the facility. As soon as they opened it up, I should note there was a very high-ranking Freemason from North Italy that showed up with a tremendous level of arrogance in terms of his right to be taking that facility over. Americans showed up. Egypt sent a helicopter there with 6 people on board, reportedly. And that helicopter somehow got trapped in a snowstorm just prior to landing next to it in those mountains and crashed, killing all 6 on board. And that's even said with a little bit of reserve, because when they went to look, they couldn't find any of those 6 bodies. And that's all wrapped up in this. And then it was after that that information just blotted right out. So whether that Freemason and he was very much, he must have been a very high-ranking Freemason, because he very much felt he had total control over this facility, even though it wasn't his country. But we try to find information on that now. It's really hard-pressed. Caesar, the archaeologist, he actually took the tunnel to Inner Earth, and what he found there, he liked. So he returned back, he reunited with his apprentice and brought information. He revealed some information that was the last he was heard of by anybody. And he returned to Inner Earth, and his apprentice joined him on that journey back to Inner Earth. So for all we know, he's alive and well in Inner Earth. But like I say, for all we know.
Yeah, I always say, it's a John Galt effect. Who remember in the Everyone That Disappears, who is John Galt?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because there were some really serious. There were some films back in the days when you rented movies at a outlet. There was a couple of movies out on John Galt, The Mystery of John Galt. There was a searching for. I can't remember what the titles were, but they were both. I think there was 2 that I rented, and they were both very interesting. Anyhow.
Yeah.
There's a lot of mysteries out there to be had, a lot of mysteries, and it's growing exponentially. These things are starting to come out, right? And in different avenues, different venues coming out. There were 200 people recently granted permission to go to Inner Earth, I read. And I don't know how factual, or if it's just like somebody got bored and wrote it and plugged it on YouTube.
I read that, and then I had to think about it for a while, and it actually kind of pissed me off because, well, I'm just like, who gets to decide who those 200 people are? I mean, if I was part of the decision, I'd say take the babies, take 200 babies, and that's been through trauma, that have, great potential, and heal them and raise them in Inner Earth. Don't let anybody adults in. I mean, start with something that's, needs to be here and that could help change. And so I kind of redirected it. And so I was like, if there were people in Inner Earth or whatever, maybe they were picking up on my telepathic message. But that's kind of how I felt about it. If it was happening, my idea was that they should take babies that have, that are gifted.
Well, according to, what's his name now? He's done a number of interviews online. I'll think of his name as we go along with it. But he was born.
Not taken. I want to change that word.
Taken?
Sorry. Yeah, because I said, 200 babies that are taken for Inner Earth, but I want to change that to 200 babies that are gifted, the opportunity to grow up in beauty and consciousness. Let's just say that.
Well, there's supposed to be an entrance to Inner Earth in close to, actually, I think it's New Mexico, I think it is. One of those states down south there's a cave that goes into a chain of mountains there. I'm sorry, I can't remember the names offhand right now. But apparently there's a tunnel that you can take there that will take you down into Inner Earth. It's like a staircase that goes down. Now, according to these people that are talking about this, the crust of the Earth is about 8 miles thick before you get to Inner Earth. Right, so you got the crust of the Earth, and then 8 miles down is where you find these communities that exist in Inner Earth. This is what's being reported. I'm trying to think of the fellow's name. Him and his twin sister were born in Inner Earth, and as infants they were taken. And it's going to sound kind of weird, but in LA they were put into a dumpster on purpose. But the dumpster was pre-selected. And there was a policewoman and another person who served as a witness who heard them crying in this dumpster. And it was apparently a setup because they needed them to get adopted into the system. It's a long story. Goodard, I believe, is the gentleman's last name. That was, he was one of the twins. And they were, what's that word where you're born with both male and female genitalia?
Hermaphrodite.
Hermaphrodite. That's, both of them were hermaphrodites, and they were adopted by a colonel from the U.S. Air Force, and who proceeded to take advantage of them as they aged. But apparently it was part of their growth process, and they got out onto their own. Billy is the first guy's name. Billy Goodard, I believe, is how you pronounce his last name, and he was quite brilliant, and he managed to graduate from middle school with a grade 12 diploma, and he got absorbed up into the U.S. Air Force. Took him in at the age of 12. This is in his story. You can find it online. It's pretty easy to find, and he had a pretty illustrious life from that point on. It's a pretty fascinating story, even if it is purely fantasy. I suspect that at least there's elements of truth, and it might very well be entirely truthful. I don't have enough personal information to really take it beyond, probably truthful, because it's very fanciful when you read it. But I mean, we're in an age where things that are fantastic that are starting to show up, i.e. the Hall of Records in Romania. We don't know even a quarter of what's going on out there that goes way back in time to this point we're walking right now. We're just starting to get brought up to date, so to speak. This is how I see it. And the internet's kind of given avenues to this, but there's other avenues as well that are more hysteric. Would you have anything to say on that?
Well, I was just thinking about, I was watching this video this morning. Actually, it's a MP3 on YouTube, but Deborah Travers, stopthecrime.net channel. But anyway, she had this video on, or I just found it today. It looks like, it came out like the 14th. And its title is World Bank financing UN Agenda 21. And that's the title, World Bank Financing UN Agenda 21.
Yeah.
But the guy who is interviewing or is on Deborah's show, on this particular interview, he's like a doctor, some kind of doctor. He's like a mad scientist doctor. And he drops a couple kind of crazy bombs on that show, just about the type of humans that they're, that he was involved with DNA and stuff like that, and trying to help, the bad guys wanted him to, do all these types of experiments and stuff that he was involved in with, creating different kinds of humanoids. So he drops a couple kind of crazy bombs in that video. So if people want to go listen to that, because, you were talking about, some of these other, beings that have been on the planet. So what else is going on? How are the chemtrails there?
We had a beautiful chemtrail sky when I woke up this morning. Yeah, they're not leaving us alone. A lot of people are starting to get that kind of that cough at the back of the throat there that just won't go away.
Yeah, I got it. And it's like not a cold because I never felt sick. I didn't get hot. I didn't get tired. I didn't get sore throat. Didn't get anything. Just one morning, just woke up with this cough. And it's really weird too because, and I was talking to some other people that got it too. And it's interesting because one of these people is not a kind of, a tinfoil wearing hat person, which I wear mine proudly. But he said it's a chemtrail cough. I think it's like a chemtrail flu is what he said. And I was like, whoa. And that's the only way you can describe it because it's not a real cold or flu. And it goes on months. And this is the weird, everything that a cold would do or a virus, it's the opposite. Your chemtrail cold is the opposite. So, for example, if you had a regular cold and cough, you would cough all night long and not be able to sleep. And when you stood up, you'd have less of a cough, kind of a thing. With this, you sleep great all night, you don't even cough, but then you wake up and you cough your head off all day. And I'm like 2 weeks into it. I mean, I know people that have had it for months.
Well, yeah, I sleep good at night. I've got what you call I call it my little space capsule, right? And it's I don't know, about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, I can't remember how long, but I bought it as a small little backwoods camper for my 4x4. It's just 8 feet deep from the back door, which would to where it would meet the cab of the truck, and I put a twin-sized bed in and a few other little things to keep me comfortable. My library is in here. And that's where I'm sitting now, actually, because that's where I keep my laptop. And I sleep really good in here. I don't know if I don't know why, but and I dream really good in here. It's why I continue to sleep in here, because the dream world opens wide up. And I have a lot of real funky dreams. A lot of them I put them more in the vein of a good direction. If dreams have the potential to come true, then it's a good direction these dreams are pointing out. I don't know how to comment beyond that, though. What's all in there? It's sort of a list of happenings. A lot of times I find myself in dream world. I'm in communities that look almost identical what you would walk around in pretty much any city or large town in North America, probably Europe too. But they're like 3 degrees tilted out in terms of being different. You know what I mean? Like they're not quite, they're very much like, but not quite. And this is in the dream world, right? So I don't know, if I'm getting to have a little glimpse forward or, maybe even a glimpse way back. Maybe a bit of both. I don't know, but I find my dreams are always really interesting. And I kind of attribute it to this capsule. And I think because of how it's located, because don't think I'm too weird people out there because, well, weird is okay. I kind of wear it like a crowd hat, but it's in my garage, this cat, and I just started sleeping in here in the hot heat of summer because it's cooler out here, and I found I sleep really, really good in it, and I have really good dreams, so I just stuck to it for that purpose. So who knows? Maybe I'm batshit crazy, but I'm kind of enjoying this batshitty kind of crazy going on as it sits today. Over to you.
Over to me. So, the other day, or like last week, I was talking to my Ryan, and Ryan's going to come back on April 13th. And he was kind of, he comes on regularly too. And he was sort of, in the beginning, was a student of mine. He was being trafficked, by beings, but now he's doing super good. He's like really, changed everything around, and he's doing really good. But he said to me last Sunday, he said, "You're right." He goes, "You really are right." He goes, "Because this whole thing is like basically not real." And so with Gord, living in his garage in his Anastasia capsule,
For it, by the way.
He, you have to learn how to live in the world that's not real in the way that you need to live in it, that's healthy for you, right? Or even if it seems weird that you're living in your garage in an Anastasia capsule, because the whole thing isn't real anyway. So the fact that you would buy a house so that you could have a bedroom and a bed to sleep in, that's what the real world or the programming wants you to do. So I think every little thing sometimes, that you do, kind of steps you outside of, this reality that we've ended up been taught to participate in. And so the more out of the box, the better. Yeah, well, but I prefer sleeping in a really small area. I think it's my energy field. I sleep better because my energy field doesn't have to expand over a whole house. You know what I mean? It can just be compressed into, like my van. I mean, I sleep so good in my van as soon as it's warm enough.
Yeah, well, that's the case with this.
Huh?
That's the case with this. I mean, I've got a little space heater that I plug in, and then just set it so it just, warms it up initially, and I might just leave it off from that point on. Depends how cold it is outside, but because there's no real heat in the garage, right? You just sort of double insulated from what's going on outside. So, if you got a really cold, freezing winter day outside, you get a little bit of extra shelter from the heat from the garage itself, and then the space capsule gives me what I need. And I don't have a lot of blankets or whatever that I sleep under, so I stay comfortable year round in here.
Yeah. Well, how long have you've been sleeping in your capsule for a while, a couple of years now, haven't you?
Yeah. It's I did it just because, certain times of the year, it's just like, it was just peaceful. And without getting into a lot of detail that doesn't need to be put online, it just was just good. It just was the right thing. And as I got adapted to it, I just sort of, I can't use the word addicted, but it's I think it's sort of what is wanted of me. I've had it outside too. Like the garage has a door at the backside going to the backyard, and when it gets warmer out, I will put it out there. And the experience is, when it's outside, is wow. Like, you can have some pretty wild experiences. I've talked about this. I mean, it was a weird night, and it was wild. And when I woke up, I was sideways in my bed, and the blankets were all askew, and I had a heart shaped on my right arm, on the underside of my right arm. There was a heart shaped. It was raised up about maybe close to 3/8 of an inch, and there was a little pinprick inside the elbow. So I don't know if I got pulled up into by a tractor beam up into a spaceship and analyzed and profiled and whatever else, and then stuffed back down here. Because the blankets and everything were sideways to me, and it was like, woke up and it almost instantly probably when I was returned to my bed, and it was just like, whoa, what the hell went on? Like, and everything was kind of topsy-turvy. Didn't really know what to make of it all. That was, and I should point out, right, where I am, this house is, there's a lot of big trees that were left on the property. It was built. It's a 75 by 125 foot lot, and the lady who we bought this property from, she was a real trip. She was she was in her early 80s, I think, when we bought it. And she was definitely a very awake lady for her time. And she didn't have a husband. She had 2 daughters, and according to the neighbors, they never saw her with a husband. So, because I kind of joked around it a little bit there at one point over the fence with the neighbors, and they said, they got quiet, and they just said, we don't think she ever had a husband. So how she had 2 daughters and all of that is for conjecture. But she definitely, there was something very unique about this lady. And when our bid went in to buy this house, it was a weak bid, and we had our backs against the wall. We're living in a different location at the time that took a ferry to get us there, and we needed to move due to economics, which brought us back into where we are now. We were having a real hard time. We were down to 2 weeks to be out of the house that was sold that we're living in, and we had to be moved. And it took 5 big 5-ton cube van loads to get our stuff out of that house and over here. My wife, myself, and our 3 boys, and a dog, and all of that had to be transported back here. And it was pretty tense because we weren't finding anybody. Where every house we went to look at sold before we could even put an offer on it. We had the opportunity to put an offer on this one, and it was a weak offer. And the agent got really mad at me because I only upped it by $100 over what it was listed for, and he thought that was really weak. And we put a very weak deposit down too, as well. But that lady, this is the information I got back from the bidding, because there was 4 offers, including ours, on the table at the same time, and that lady's 2 daughters told her, were trying to have her avoid taking our offer, but she insisted on taking our offer. And I wondered about that for a long time afterwards. And then when I was talking to the neighbor, the male neighbor next door, about some things, and how did he word that? It was oh crap, sorry, I kind of dropped my thought on there a little bit, but she was a real trip, this lady. And this is what it was. She had built another house on a property up by a lake nearby here, in more of a resort area, and she wanted to move and live in that house. And 2 days later, she returned to the one that we're in now, and when he asked her why she moved back, her answer was her people wouldn't go to the other house. So in other words, her people are still on this property. She's passed on a few years ago now, but so she was well into her 90s before she passed on. I don't know. She was just a unique person. She was into her 60s, and she went to school, got her teacher's degree, and she went and taught at a school on an Indian reserve up north of here. So she was definitely she was right on the frontier of women, standing up for themselves and being independent and all of that. And I think she had very strong spiritual connections too, much like ourselves, Bridgette.
Oh, no, I'm just kidding. All right, so I was just trying to think about, all right, well, what do you think about everything else that's going on?
Well,
What do you think about, like, what's happening in Venezuela? It's pretty crazy.
It's the globalists, right? And Venezuela is manipulating itself, and it's backed by China, and it's backed by Russia, right? Russia is the power center of the planet now, and the globalists don't want to think that way because we got the U.S. and we got Britain, and we got they're on the back and they're on their heels, right? And I don't think they can get back on their foot again because things are going down in many directions, and the internet has a big play in that, as I see it. My friend, close friend, you know who he is. I'm not going to say his name because I'm not permitted to, Anyway, we just had coffee, and then when we were leaving coffee to cut back here so I could be back here in time, there was an elderly couple out in the patio at the coffee shop, and my friend got to talking to him. He's all about free man on the land kind of thing, and they were kind of this couple. They're old. They're probably in their 70s, and they understood some of the stuff. They know that there's things wacky in the world. They just don't know why. And you try to explain to them, and then they kind of shut down. They kind of laugh and they giggle. They don't want to accept that their government could be possibly behind what's going astray in this world and how things are getting kind of out of whack. And it's. I mean, I live in a town that's definitely, most people probably listening, I don't know how tuned in, but pretty much any town that's got a sizable population, and especially if you drive into town and there's a sign that says incorporated blah blah blah, whatever the town's name, that means that's basically a Jesuit controlled community, right? And if you understand how the Vatican is implicated into all the governments in the free world. Russia is probably outside of it. China's probably outside of it. But otherwise, they're pretty much implicated into most governments around the globe. And it's that Jesuit power that really undermines so much that goes on for the rights and the freedoms of humanity. And you can go back, even Lincoln's assassination, we were not given the truth of that either. His predecessor was part of driving the Jesuit control out of Washington, D.C. And the Jesuits were very strong about regaining that. And they were behind the Civil War. They were what really fueled that war, North against South, to divide the country. And they wanted to get that control back into D.C., the District of Columbia. And so Lincoln's predecessor blocked all of that, and Lincoln was in the process of continuing it on. This is what I've read. So, I mean, it could be BS history. I'm not educated in depth enough along those lines to really say one way or the other. My gut, though, however, thinks that this is the truth. And you look what's going on now with the Vatican. The Vatican's really under fire now. They made they made a deal with that came in and built a temple. The Mormons. So there's a unity that several years back. I don't know how many, maybe 5 or 6, that developed between the Vatican and the Mormons. And the Mormons built a temple in Rome. So the nefarious activities because there's a lot of spotlight being shone on the Vatican because child sacrifice, these kinds of topics. What I read was that got moved to this new temple that the Mormons built. So the Mormons are hat in hand in with what the Vatican's up to, and those are the kinds of strangleholds that we got to get that control out of the capital centers. I'm sure that here in Canada, our capital centers, whether they're provincial or federal, have Jesuit control riding over top of what goes on and what gets agreed on and what gets passed through legislature and so on. And it's the same thing in the United States, and it's probably the same in Europe. What we're seeing going on in France now with things that are going on there. And I think that's spreading through more of Europe, too.
Well, think about the Brexit. I mean, it's so ridiculous. The people voted to leave the EU, and those politicians cannot get it together to leave the EU. every deal that they come up with for Brit or London, whatever, to leave the EU, they kibosh it. Somebody kiboshes it. Oh yeah, well, that's not a good agreement. And it's like, but it's what the people wanted. Yeah, but you can see how behind closed doors that these politicians and, religious, oriented control basis or whatever, you can see how it's playing out behind closed doors. Like, it's just becoming like a ping pong ball game. And then, did you see that thing about summer? They were like, well, since we can't seem to, come to agreement between the countries and, for London, the UK to leave the EU, we've decided that we're just going to, close it down, and we're going to put another vote on the ballot so that people can vote for it again or not vote for it again. And the people were like, no, we're not doing that, So it's interesting how they... Oh, hey, it's commercial time. We'll be right back.
All right.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Hello, all you good-looking people out there in Revolution Radio. This is Mario. I invite you to join me Thursdays at 6 o'clock for This, That, and the Other. It's a show about you, it's a show about me, but ultimately it's a show where we try to have a little bit of fun. We discuss important topics, and we do our best to be apolitical. So I invite you, put on your favorite pair of comfy sweats, your smoking jacket, and grab a beverage of your choice, and join me Thursday evenings at 6 o'clock. For This, That, and the Other on Revolution Radio.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
From the astral realms to the physical plane, the halls of power to the walls of home, the multiverse to the innerverse, all will be haunted by the ghost in the machine. I am Steve Zerloff, the ghost in the machine. Mondays, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Studio B, exclusively here on Revolution.Radio.
How healthy are your arteries? Deteriorating circulation has a number of early warning signs. High cholesterol, high blood pressure, fingers and or toes often go cold.
Hey everybody,
arms and or
Bridgette
legs
Lyn
often
Dolgoff,
go to sleep.
host of Carrying
Sharp
Stones and Digging
diagonal
Holes,
crease in the earlobe.
which
Short
is Saturday,
walks cause
every
cramping or
Saturday,
pains in
1
legs.
p.m. Eastern
Memory
Standard
is not
Time
as good as it
to
used to
3
be.
p.m. Eastern
Ankles
Standard
swell
Time.
late in the day. Chest pain
And today,
after
right
physical
now,
exercise
we're in
or
the second
emotional
hour.
stress.
If
you
can go to
experience
Revolution
even
Radio,
one of these
freedomslips.com,
symptoms, your circulatory
to our
system
website,
is crying out for
and
attention.
you can look for the funding
Extendivite
button,
is a
click on the
natural
funding button,
solution
find
to
all
help
kinds of
improve your
ways
overall
that
health.
you can fund
Extendivite
Revolution
is
Radio.
not your
We
average
all
heart
volunteer here at
To order,
Revolution
call
Radio, so we do need your support to keep
1-877-928-8822
us up and
or
running.
visit heartdrop.com or find us on Amazon.
I'm Bridgette Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff, your host for the first hour and the second hour. And also, you can find information about me and the show,
station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates.
Get in contact with me.
Revolution Radio,
all right, so second hour, we are
radio, and now we return you to your host.
Shh. Commercials are still going. Okay. I think the commercials are over now. All right, anyway, so yeah, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Click on the funding button and find ways that you can fund us because we are 100% listener supported. And also second hour of Carrying Stones and Digging Holes, your host, Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff. And I'm offering a spring healing session cleaning from now until April 15th. And it is half price, and you can find out more information about my shamanism medical sessions by going to Ministry of Consciousness Nevada.org and clicking on the shamanism medical sessions. And if you're interested, you can contact me and book an appointment. Alrighty then, because I think, lots of changes are coming, and you may want to be ready for those changes on all levels. Okay, anyway, all right, so I was thinking about, Gord, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so there's another X-Files, the one I watched on the season 11, mind you, because I don't have a TV, so I have to watch the stuff whenever, I can.
Opportunity knocks, go for it.
Yeah, and I was like, oh my God, season 11 X-Files, I'm so excited. I was like jumping up and down because I'm a serious X-File, nut job.
Oh, me too.
Well, and X-Files during the course of my life, I think it came out when I was like in high school, the first ones, maybe younger. But it helped me to kind of realize like that what I saw in the world and how weird the whole thing really was, and all the different, is it the government, is it the extraterrestrials, all these different kinds of things that are going along, really fit into things that were happening to me or had happened to me or had happened to people I knew. So it was kind of like the first show that it was kind of really helpful for me growing up because I lived in the doody, and I knew that what people thought was real was just not real, but it's hard to explain it in a whole population. But now more and more people are starting to kind of totally wake up. But anyway, they have, I think it's episode 5 on season 11. It's called something, the Return of the Head Sweat. Mm-hmm. Or the Forehead Sweat is, I think, the episode. But anyway, they're joking around with what people really remember and the fact that they don't remember, but yet they call it, the Mandela effect. And then at one point,
brought that in.
Yeah, at some point, somebody corrects them and calls it the Mingala effect. And then it even gets even weirder from there. But it's kind of like a, tongue-in-cheek kind of sort of a comedy kind of about the whole thing, kind of like typically what the X-Files would do in the past. And about this guy who thought that he was original X-File agent with Scully and Mulder, and he was trying to piece like his past together, and he couldn't piece it together. And then in the end, it just showed that he didn't remember his timelines correctly, and that he had made stuff up, like he'd had a mental break, and so the different things that were in his life, he thought that they were real. And so he started labeling these events like, the Mandela effect. And then, then they were saying the Mingala effect or whatever, but it turned out to be that the person just didn't really remember their past that accurately anyway. And that's kind of how I think about it, like in shamanism. The reason why, a lot of the big reason that why recapitulating is so important is to collect all of the information, because you weren't really every time that you're not really in the present moment, you don't really remember what's happened during the course of that time period. That's why you do recapitulating through your whole life, so you can recapitulate it all back into, one timeline. And that's what I think it is. I think a lot of people don't remember things correctly, and are, because they hear a lot of things nowadays that actually goes into their collective and changes it too. So it was kind of like a really good take on the whole Mandela effect, or the Mingala effect. But anyway, it was and then they were trying to like go on timelines and all this other stuff. I tell people that you should watch it, because it's probably, closer to truth than any of it. And at the end of it, they find a file on this guy, and they tell him what his whole history was, because he worked for all these different government agencies. And the last one he worked for was like the NSA. And so he was listening in on people's phone calls and reading their stuff. And so his favorite people to listen to were Scully and Mulder on their phone. And so this is why he had some kind of big mental break. And that's why he had thought that he was an original agent with those guys, because he remembered everything that they ever talked about, because he heard it on the NSA, right? Like it was his own memory kind of a thing. Anyway.
That's that he was mentally listening in on the phone conversations, not through electronic means.
Yeah, well, he was listening to him like NSA, like while they're talking on the phone live between the two. But anyway, bottom line is like, that's how easy it is to corrupt the mind. People don't realize like how easy it is to corrupt the mind and implant memories that, or take away memories that, in which you don't remember things, or you remember things completely different. And a lot of this stuff can be done now by, remote control, basically, right? I mean, look at everything in your house. You got a smart TV. Now everybody's putting in these little smart things, to adjust the temperatures in their house and stuff.
Yeah, you don't want that stuff.
No, you don't want any of that stuff. And so all of this can just like bleep. And, think about this. If it is true, like the other X-Files we were talking about earlier in the show, that they can actually, through a phone, take part of your consciousness. How do you know that's not what they're doing through all these smart, things, is actually pulling pieces of your consciousness up into some server?
I think 5, maybe 6 years old Panasonic TVs, the company, their TVs, they didn't have any of that smart stuff on them. And that's the last TV we got. It doesn't have any of that smart stuff on it. It was the end of the era. It was one of the electronic outfits out here. They're having it was a Boxing Day sale, right? And that's where I picked it up at, is the Boxing Day sale. And I kind of knew even back then to look for, the new ones, everything's smart on them, which means we're the dumb ones and they're the smart ones. It's essentially how that comes across when you look at it properly. Because we just sign ourselves over through these TVs, and they watch everything that's going on. This home is old enough. The only thing is we've got the I don't know if it's the full upgrade to what you guys have in the States in terms of 5G, but it's still a pretty strong Wi-Fi setup.
Well, they tried to come by your house a few months ago and put 5G on your roof, didn't they? For free. They said, hey, we'll do it for free. You said, no, leave.
Yeah, no, I denied them. And I mean, even what my capsule here, that one of the advantages of it is it's kind of double insulated. It doesn't mean that stuff can't get through, but it sort of gives you a little more insulating factor in that respect. I think this is my own suspicion, but I think it's our own strength of mind that keeps us insulated. If you develop enough strength of mind, and I might be completely naive in this, I don't know, because it's, what do we really know? But that's my thought on it, my take on it. And the other side of that coin is the closer you are to nature, like where you can step out, like you got, like Vancouver, for example, you got the North Shore Mountains with lots of hiking trails. You can go up Indian Arm, fairly easy access into hiking trails up there, and up Pitt Lakeway. It's a little more dangerous going up that way because there's not really a lot of trails at the back end up that way. But if you're woods wise, you could do it easy. Where I am, there's lots of mountain access, lots of backwoods access to nature. I'm in a pretty blessed area in that concern. You can go up Harrison Lake, you can go up the western side of Harrison Lake, even the eastern side, and you can access some incredibly shamanic areas going up in that area. I've got some native friends up north, so I got a better idea what's available on that end, which takes you up the eastern side of Harrison Lake. And even right where I am, close to here, there's a couple of the mountains around here that are incredibly shamanic areas, and I personally have experience. I don't know about other people going in there. I suspect you got to be a bit dialed in at least to really key in on what. And I think the spiritual aspect of these regions, they know what's in your heart as you're walking in, hiking in. They'll know, and depending on, like myself, most of my hikes in my region, I'm my faithful companion, my little girl Kiana. She's an Australian cattle dog, and she's my best hiking companion I've ever had, because she just likes to go. She likes to enjoy it, and she knows. She knows. She's pretty dialed in as far as an animal can be in terms of this world too. So I'm kind of rambling on here, Bridgette.
Well, I was gonna say, so a lot of people have gotten involved with, like William Reich's work, but they only get involved like to a certain amount, and so there's this big catchphrase that's been going on for a while called orgone energy. Mm-hmm. I think it's ORGONE. And so mountains, and we know this for a fact because, I've had Roger Spur on from Mud Fossils University, and he'll tell you that, all these mountains and everything are dead giants, like really big giants. And when, their bodies decayed into mud fossil, they became crystals, and different kinds of metals, right? Because that's what the organs would have, preserved as heavy amounts of, different types of minerals and metals. So mountains, this is why a lot of the orgone energy shapes, you'll see they're like usually pyramids, and they put all kinds of different crystals and metals in them. They use like a poly based, hardener in molds. But the reason why they have those shapes and stuff is because orgone is the original energy of mountains, right? Mm-hmm. So the orgone energy is very strong in mountains, because in mountains they have all these different kinds of crystals and all kinds of different kinds of, hard drives of different kinds of energy that are, syncing up and working together. And so there's a lot of data and information or energy or whatever you want to call it that's held in those fields. So the only thing so when Gord's talking about going up into the mountains, like really tall mountains, especially where you can get up really high, you've got a huge amount of orgone energy. Now, I read an article by some people, scientist people, kind of out of the box people, that said that Mount Fuji was one of the, I don't know, highest, biggest, strongest orgone outputters in the world.
That's in Japan, is it not?
Mm-hmm. But then, then there's this other question Okay, because I read, other parts of William Reich's work, a lot of the work that most people don't read. A lot of these people, get really involved with orgone energy to, protect themselves from like smart meters and chemtrails and radiation and a lot of this other stuff, but they don't really actually read all of the research that's available. And so they get up on these high horses without having read a lot of the information. So the only thing that was counterproductive to orgone energy, William Reich he had a box. He built a box and it had strong orgone energy in it. And he would have his patients come, that had cancer and whatever else, and they would sit in this box for, like a duration of time. And eventually they would become cured of, whatever they had, mostly cancer. But one time when he was doing a lot of his testing with orgone energy, he ended up testing the box that was, heavy, strong orgone energy inside the box. And then he threw some nuclear material or particles in it. I'm not really sure how it all worked out, but the whole thing exploded. So orgone energy, especially strong, and nuclear materials or particles are not really compatible, and they can make, some explosions. They can create some serious, dangerous kinds of energies. So I always wonder about Mount Fuji now, with having Fukushima and 4 nuclear plants exploding there in Japan, and all of the nuclear fallout and what that's done to the orgone energy. And because the orgone energy is pure life and nuclear energy is pure death.
Well, they also had the 2 big bombs dropped on them at the end of World War II.
Right. So, but anyway, it's interesting because we have nuclear fallout everywhere. They've been dumping, nuclear waste into the oceans and rivers forever. I was reading an article that one of the oldest nuclear plants, like that was in like someplace like Scotland on the ocean, that they were literally dumping radioactive waste, and there was a perfect water, channel that took it right into India to a beach there. And so like they would throw it perfectly into this water stream in the ocean that took it exactly over to this beach in India. Well, to this day, they have and this was like in the 50s or something like that. And to this day, they have some of the most extreme genetic, issues in all of India, because people would go into that water and they would wash. And they were, that stuff was, coming right up onto the beach and everything. So you think about just recently, the Woolsey fire that was in LA going on during the same time as the Paradise Fire in Northern California. But LA has 2 nuclear facilities. One's right on the beach between LA and San Diego that has been shut down, but nobody's ever cleaned it up. People that go there get huge readings of high levels of radioactivity around the whole thing and for quite a ways. And then they had the Woolsey fire that burned down the one, I think it was called Rocketdyne, and it had another name. But this just happened a few months ago, and it was one of the largest, what they called super site in all of North America. And it had been decommissioned, but nobody ever cleaned it up. The little towns that were close to this nuclear facility, had huge amounts of child cancers. I mean, like off the charts kind of a thing, totally ignored. Ignored from medical doctors. I mean, totally ignored from city officials, state officials, everyone just completely ignored it. Well, that burned down, and all of that nuclear radioactive ash, started flying all over. And, some of that stuff lasts for 200,000 years. I think most people don't really understand that if it burns up, it doesn't matter if it burns up or doesn't burn up, it still has that large span of life before, and even just a small dot of plutonium ingested can kill you in 6 weeks with the worst type of cancer you've ever had, even if you had no cancer. I mean, these are the kind of things that we're dealing with. So, talking about orgone energy, and all of the radioactive material, that radioactive material would definitely suppress, suppress the orgone energy. And, this is the thing is, I think what's going on with the airplanes. I mean, big airplane crashes, big planes barely getting up and then having to turn back, small planes. We've had tons of small planes in the United States just crashing all over the place. And I think that it's because there's so much radioactive material that is in, the level where the airplanes fly, that, and the Wi-Fi and 5G signals, because Mark Steele says that, they've had Wi-Fi towers by bridges, concrete bridges that have metal and concrete and stuff, and that the Wi-Fi is dissolving. It's breaking down the infrastructure of that metal and that concrete. And it speeds it up, breaks it up into into fuel, right? So for fires and stuff like that. So think about these airplanes, that have engine parts that are plastic and whatever else. And also, if people are on the planes with their Wi-Fi and stuff like that on, it becomes like a giant microwave oven inside too, right? The more devices you have, in one area. So those planes, they're being broken down by the radiation. And some of it, there was a guy who was flying, he was putting his videos up, but he never showed himself, and he was flying like coast to coast and around the world. And he had all these different, radiation detectors and EMFs and all these other little detectors. And he would actually pull them out of his bag. And as he was flying across the United States, and some of the highest level of nuclear radiation from Fukushima still up in the clouded area, up on that level where the planes go through. I mean, some places were like 1,400 CPMs. I think 100 CPMs is like emergency dangerous. And people are flying. And so you can imagine that radiation has got to be breaking down the airline parts, and also the Wi-Fi and 5G systems as well have to be breaking the whole planes down. So maybe it isn't a fact that the planes are not being made badly. It's just the 5G, Wi-Fi, and radiation are breaking down all of the parts more rapid than in times before, making the planes not safe.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. My guides have basically told me a long time back to not fly commercial anymore. I don't know how to explain that to anybody that would make sense, but it's something that I've felt for at least a decade, probably longer.
Yeah, no, the last time I think I flew on a plane was in 2000, I don't know, 6 or something. No, 2005, and I had to get on the plane by force and come from Las Vegas, and I had like a total panic attack. It just was, the whole experience in that airport was just crazy. And I just had like a total stress attack. I couldn't even walk down, onto the airplane. I got onto the airplane, I had a massive panic attack, and they had to let me off, and I had to wait like, I don't know, several hours to try to get on another airplane to get to Reno. Because I just couldn't cope with it. I couldn't cope with all the people and the stress, and I had to go down there for a business meeting at that time. And it was pretty crazy. So I don't do elevators, because I had that panic attack on the airplane, and it was so severe, like literally crippling, just so severe. I don't go into movie theaters anymore because I can't go down the little hall to get into the movie theater because it brings up major post-traumatic stress disorder from, being on that airplane and having to get off and not being able to get off. And then also I don't do elevators at all. I don't go in elevators. If I go visit people, even at a casino here that's 29 stories high, I take the stairs, or I just have them meet me downstairs.
I've been that way by instinct for a long time.
I can't. Yeah.
Take stairs. I don't like being in that box, even if I'm by myself. But even more so, if it gets crowded, I don't like being stuck in that elevator.
No. I can't do a lot of buildings anymore. I mean, that's why I really appreciate when it starts to get warmer and I can, camp out in my van more. Because being in big buildings, being in an airplane, my worst, I always think about, I'm like exactly half Russian. I would like to, at some point, go to the country where, half of my family came from and see that. But the whole problem is I can't get on an airplane. And not only can I not get on an airplane, I cannot go into an airport. And there's no way that you're going to be able to drug me for 12 hours to fly on a plane to go to Russia. I mean, just to go visit. And so there's just a lot of things, because of, whether it's intuition or, whatever's driving it. But there's that sense of
specific to get to Russia.
Huh?
That even to get on a ship and cross over, you're still.
Yeah, you're still boxed up.
Yeah. It's I think, it's myself personally, I kind of feel that where I am is where I'm meant to be. Energetically, 10 years ago, I would have laughed at that concept. But what I've experienced, the mountain I mentioned previously, the mountain is hollow. According to the Cavers Club, it's hollow, and there's numerous caves going into it. I've been up on the mountain, up quite high, and there's one spot where I've identified there's a sinkhole up there that drops down into the mountain. I don't know how much rope you'd need to go down to get in there, because once you're in, you're in, right? It's dark, and even if you got a headlamp on so that you can see around yourself, it's a limited view that you would get with that. I don't know of anybody that's attempted to go in. Even these caves, I don't think anybody, they've identified caves, and I think they've explored the openings of them, but I don't think anybody's gone in depth into the mountain. And reportedly, there is a tunnel that leaves that mountain. And this came from a guy, a friend of mine, who I'm not going to mention on here just because, but you know who I'm talking about, Bridgette. We were having a discussion with this guy, and he was a commissioner, and our thesis building here, we were looking to see if we could go in and visit somebody in there just to do a little bit of verbal exploration on the topic. CSIS is our version of the CIA up here in Canada, and he was a commissioner. So when you drive up to the gate to get in to go to the parking lot, you got to stop at his gate, right, and talk to him. This guy said he could trace back every carnation he's had from the very first one, going back, I don't know how many hundreds, maybe thousands of years. I don't know. He never mentioned time. We just let him talk, and when I mentioned this particular mountain, he knew exactly which mountain I was talking about, and he says that there's a massive tunnel that goes out of this mountain and heads up the coastline up north. It kind of heads out towards the coastline, which would be kind of in line with Vancouver, and then north. And there's a native elder I know who knows that he grew up in Vancouver, and there's numerous tunnels that travel underneath the city. But I think most of the coast, Seattle, I know for a fact, has many tunnels, as does, what's the next city down the line there? It's in Oregon. Name's escaping me at the moment. It'll come back probably when it's least convenient. But anyway, there's a lot of tunnels and underground formats to this all three of these coastal cities, right? And these are all gold rush cities through that timeline in the 1800s, when we had the massive, I think it was Custer that inappropriately put it out, which pretty much really brought an end to native occupation of the prairies. But that fueled the gold rush, basically fueled any native hope of maintaining their lands as they once knew, because it's just the onrush of all these people, and they all come out armed, and they're backed by military and everything else. So it really ended an era of North America and introduced a new era. And you've got these three major cities that have major tunnels. With the child trafficking, the elder I'd mentioned earlier, 2 years ago, I think it was, I was talking to him. He said that they closed down one of those. It's an underground railroad that children could be funneled out to a major port where they could get on commercial. They're not for passengers, but they could. It was a way of, ships that haul coal and that kind of thing. They could load them up in there and then take them to other countries where who knows what would happen to these poor kids. But that was a way of funneling kids out of North America, and that got shut down, thankfully. Whether they've opened up other ones, I don't know. But these tunnels, and this is all in the northwest of America, right? Vancouver being the last major city. Prince Rupert, I think, is kind of in the same vein. That's outside of the Haida Quay. They're close to the top of British Columbia, just before you get into Alaska. So that port too, I think, has been used because there's strong ties into Alberta and more into eastern Canada through that end from the north, and it also goes through the road to access out there. Highways out of Alberta actually go through 3 or 4 reservations too, major reservations, maybe a few more, I'm not sure exactly. There are at least 4 anyhow. So you can kind of see how all these things tie together, and in the Jesuit scheme of things, none of these communities end up where they are by hap chance. There's a purpose behind them. What do you say on that, Bridgette?
Yeah.
Oh, am I coming through, Claire?
Yeah, you are.
I just realized I was sitting a little bit back from the laptop. I don't know how strong my mic is on here.
Yeah, you're doing perfectly good. Well, I think it goes back a long time. I've been watching those mud flood guys. British flat Earth guy.
Oh yeah.
And the thing is, like, he doesn't always. Most of the stuff he talks about is not flat Earth. Most of it he shows pictures and things, of past. Right now, they're a group of them are getting these older books, and some of them need to be translated. Kind of mind-blowing stuff. But it looks like the Phoenicians have always been around, right? And they've called themselves, different people, but they've been pretty brutal. And when the Phoenicians come in, and I think it's the Pharaohs, right? The Phoenicians, the Pharaohs, Dr. Hross, Hross, the Pharaoh Show, 1, 2, and 3, France and Switzerland. He walks and shows people about the old stuff through the towns and shows. He came from those bloodlines and he became a professor of history. And then he decided that he was going to expose what they were doing and show people and give them an education about who's really in control. They ended up kidnapping his son when his son was 12 and sacrificing his son, kind of in a way to, shut him up. It didn't shut him up. But anyway, you can go on YouTube and you can watch the Pharaoh shows, and he goes through and he shows you that it's, basically the pharaohs that are in control. I'm going to do a YouTube channel, Reno Pharaoh Show 1, 2, and 3, because he's inspired me, because we have we have our own modern day Egyptian stuff that's going on here at the largest casino we have in the area. And they actually have the sun glyph on it as part of the symbol. And the Freemasons, the Templars, the Pharaohs, they're all involved in it. And they also are involved with putting lions in the front and giving it kind of, when you walk in, a little bit of an Egyptian flair. So, but it meets all the criteria of what Dr. Haras would show. But anyway, people should go watch that. But it looks like it's all kind of going back. They've been translating all these books, British Flat Earth Guy and some of these other people. And what they're finding is that that it looks like it's been the Phoenicians ever since, and that the actual, Statue of Liberty is actually a Phoenician goddess, because they're not really, they think it's hermaphrodite, right? The Statue of Liberty is more hermaphroditic. So it's kind of crazy. And periodically the Phoenicians would rise up, which were where the maritime law comes from, and admiralty law and all of these things. So we still are dealing with those people who've been here quite a long time, who've been controllers. And they show different architect all over the world where it has the Phoenician influence. So as once they took over that civilization, then they put in some of their own Phoenician stuff on top of it, right?
Yeah, even Antarctica is going up now.
Yeah, so to wipe out the original people and their history at these different locations. And so when the Phoenicians would come in and wipe them out or take them over, they would wipe out, their culture, their language, their books, libraries, medicine, anything about the people. And then they would copy paste their Phoenician stuff on their civilization, and in some cases changing their own buildings, the buildings that were, or things that were left behind. So it's been going on a long time.
Yeah. Like you look at Egypt, for example, the major focus is on the pyramids there. But when you look at the pyramids, especially the Great Pyramid, it's not a tomb. It's in fact, it's what's in there. It's pretty much empty. But not far from there, you have the Sphinx. Right? And the Sphinx is probably the least investigated structure in the whole region there. And
right, but the Sphinx now, I mean, there are a lot, yeah. Well, there are people that have, have gone back and kind of revisited the Sphinx, and what they're finding is that the Sphinx is like, because of just the rain, what I mean? Rain damage, weather damage that's been done to it. But they think now that it could have added up to 3 different, originally it would have had a certain kind of face on it, maybe a human face or whatever. And then when the Phoenicians would have come in and taken down that whole area, they would have, refabricated a different kind of face on it, right? To change the history of the area and to gain control of the narrative. And I think they're still like controlling, as controllers worldwide, or the pharaohs. They're still controlling the narrative of what we believe in the history. And, it's interesting because what I'm learning, from John Levy, I love his channel, the UAP guy, I love him. He's about showing all the fakery with NASA and space and all this other stuff, and us traveling into space and how ridiculous the whole thing is. But we believe this narrative that's not even true. But, it's because this is the stuff that we've been taught to believe.
Well, that's the magician's trick, right? Pay attention to the left hand, and don't look at the right hand, what it's doing.
Right. Exactly.
And the whole thing with the Sphinx, I think the Sphinx is a lot more relative to what we need to be looking into than the pyramids. The pyramids are just whatever they were built for. They're a distraction, essentially. You got the pyramid in Bosnia that it's, and they're not all that, they don't really get all tied up with their history and all of that. They welcome tourists to tour, and anybody can go there and get a tour of that pyramid. But it's the Sphinx, right? So you got the Sphinx head that's in the mountains that I talked about earlier, and how it connects to the Sphinx in Egypt, and with the tunnel that goes down in there, and the Hall of Records that's supposedly under the left paw of the Sphinx, which we hear nothing about really. You get little innuendos and little suggestions about it from time to time, right, depending who's speaking on the topic. You know, some YouTube archaeologist or something along those lines that's a little bit out of the box looking into these things. But you don't really get any depth on that. And I think that's where the real depth is. And why are all these tunnels that are ancient, that go way, way, way back in time, that cover off all these areas, going right into Tibet and those kind of regions, and from there into Inner Earth. And Inner Earth, I don't know if you've noticed, but all of a sudden there's like tons of information starting to show up about Inner Earth.
Right. That's what makes me realize, like, whenever I see that kind of stuff, like a trend, I start to worry that it's propaganda, you know, that it's also been put out.
Well, yeah.
And because the thing is any kind of memories can be implanted to any kind of person or their mind. You know what I mean? For example, a lot of people who channel think that they're channeling these light beings are, and I know for a fact because of experience, but they're mostly channeling reptilians, reptoids that don't have bodies, that are trafficking here, you know, more on the demonic, or what they call the shadow people, right? Because they're reptoids without bodies. They came here, they left their body, their suit, you know, sitting in their closet at home, and came here multidimensionally, looking to try to, you know, jump a body or host a ride. But anyway, they give people all kinds of, you know, interesting information. My native teachers have always told me that, you know, the ones that have the lightest, that seem the most positive and shimmery and want to divulge all this really amazing information to you, usually are the ones that are the most evil and dark. And so I don't know if I can trust, like, a lot of, you know, when there's like this trend that comes up, like the New Age trend, the Mandala effect trend, you know, all these different kinds of trends. And, you know, who is really putting out the information, and the mind control masses, even if they think they're not being mind controlled, are picking up this information. And so memories, like we were talking about that whole X-Files, you know, season 11, episode 5, where the guy doesn't really remember what happened. He's kind of assimilated things and created his own history, but he has no recollection of places in the past where he should have been, because he's created something else through, you know, having a mental break. And so, you know, sometimes we have to be really careful about the information or Inner Earth. So I'm like still kind of on the sidelines about Inner Earth. I mean, you know, I am exploring it, but I'm concerned whenever I see like a really big trend. And this is the other thing too, is just with friends of mine who are MK Ultra. I also have clients that are MK Ultra. You will never see them for the most part. I mean, Bear's been on my show before, but we didn't talk really about his MK Ultra stuff. But for the most part, their information is quite a bit different than MK Ultra, than some of these other people. And I'm not saying that these other people haven't had those experiences, but if they were in MK Ultra programs, how much of that experience really happened, and how much of it was programmed, so that, you know, they would go out into the public and talk about a whole bunch of things, to get the public kind of used to and ready. Like, this is the topic we started on the show with, about how everything is kind of leading us, you know, to this apex that's not going to be really positive.
There's a really interesting series on Netflix, the Dirk Gently Detective Agency. and they touch on a lot of stuff. It's sort of along the lines of X-Files with a little bit. It's sort of directed off from, but it's the core of it is somewhat similar. And one of the lead characters, he's constantly repeating that everything is connected.
Yeah, I totally believe everything's connected, but this is the thing is everything's connected is used more in that new age belief system. You know, you're in the flow, you're manifesting, everything's connected, when it also could be on the derogatory end, that everything's connected and that, you know, really you're heading, you know, we're heading down like a road that we're not going to be able to backtrack out of.
Yeah. Usually these types of shows, this one is a series too, but usually their intent is to alleviate the guilt of the so-called controllers who, you know, they're going down their path of their plans, and these shows are to alleviate their consciousness, so that they're actually advising us of what's going to happen, what they're doing.
Well, that's the magic, right? Like you talked about the magician. So the magician can't use you if you don't voluntarily do it. Mm-hmm. You know, so they have to tell you what's going on so that they can get your free will activated so that you're fully participating in it, because that gives them more energy to do it, and it gives them, you know, the financial, we'll just say, contract or agreement to carry it out. Because once you kind of know, even though they're calling it fiction or whatever else, and you do nothing about it, then that means that you're voluntarily involved, right? You're participating in it fully because you're not doing anything about it. And that's the thing, you know, like that's one of the one things that pedophiles, like, you know, serial pedophile will say is that when the child doesn't refuse, that's consent.
That's consent. Yeah, I know. It speaks to a very distorted mind that could, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, I'm a father of 3 sons, and, you know, it's having raised 3 youngsters to adulthood and watching them go into their, you know, it's just really hard to picture that kind of thinking, but it does exist out there where, I mean, they're that twisted that just because a child doesn't say no, then they're consenting. You know, it's
well, but I think that's how they look at us as the masses too.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
anything that they put out that we're not saying, you know, look, I'm not consenting to that. And it's funny because I have more of my clients that are kind of waking up, and one of them, he's really funny. Now his new thing is, I do not consent, and I do not. He uses another thing too. Anyway, but it's funny. He'll put it on emails and stuff like that. Because he's kind of like, you know, kind of woken up that he needs to let people know that he's not going to consent to things. Like openly, you know what I mean? Stand up and say it. So it's kind of cool. More that, you know, more people don't consent. I think it'll be better in the long run. And this is the other thing too, is, you know, whether, you know, we hit an apex and a lot of people are killed, a lot of people are starved, a lot of people, who knows what's going to happen, right? The thing is, the only thing that you have is your own integrity and choosing how you're going to walk that path, no matter what it's going to look like to the very end. You know, that's really the only choice that you have, or only control you have. Like, you know, for example, Gord, he likes to sleep in his little, you know, space, you know, ship in the garage, because that makes him happy and it brings him peace, and he feels, you know, more connected to what he wants to be connected to. And so, you know, by making those kinds of choices, to have integrity and walk your road and walk it in a way what is really important and valuable to your own self emotionally, really is the only, you know, real thing that you have. All right, we have 6 minutes coming into the final part.
Yeah. Wow, boy, does time ever fly on this show.
I know. I know. It's like, it's on fast forward. If we're serious. Yeah, so it's interesting, I think about more and more how this reality could very well be, or, what we think is real and it's not real, is really the Truman Show.
Yeah.
I mean, really, really the Truman Show. There's a blurb on this one video I was watching today, and it shows Truman going in because he's got his suitcase packed because he's starting to kind of wake up and see like everything around him is pretty weird. He can't really put his finger on it, but it's pretty weird. So he thinks like he can just take time off work and he can just go down to, the real person, to buy an airline ticket. I think the travel agent. So he walks in there and says, "Hey, I want to get a plane to go pretty much anywhere. What do you have? When do you want to leave? I want to leave today." And she's clicking on the computer for a few minutes and clicking, and then the computer makes a noise. And she looks at him and she said, "It looks like we don't have any flights available going anywhere for the next month." And he's like, "What? The next month?" He's like, "Well, I don't have time for that." Because they're trying to stall him, right? Because he can't leave, where he's at. They can't let him out. But they're not going to tell him the truth at the same time. And so he says, "Well, I'll just make other arrangements." He grabs his suitcase, he walks out. But that's how it looks like more and more in this reality. I think the more you kind of like live it on your terms, maybe, I don't know if your terms is that, but you follow your own path, and you follow what helps you emotionally and what helps you physically and what helps you spiritually, and follow those follow that path that's right for yourself. And I'm not saying that it's going to save you, and I'm not saying that it's going to change the reality, but it helps with you feeling confident within your own self that you, maybe not the people around you, but you are, have your journey under control no matter what happens. And that's what my teacher Bobido used to say, whatever is going to be, and whatever is. And the only thing that makes different is how you show up to it. If you want to show up and be surprised by it and then go into drama and conflict for a period of time, or you show up to it and, with peace of mind and peace in your heart, no matter how derogatory the situation is, you'll be, better versed on, how you're going to deal with it in the way that you need to deal with it, right or wrong.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We're essentially in a state of duality for us who are awake. I see it that way anyway. I mean, I actually count myself as blessed. I live in a community that is essentially a Jesuit community, but it's offset because when I leave the community to get up into the mountains, and the district changes. So in terms of districts, right, it's not longer the part of the district of the city I live in when you get up into the mountain ranges. And there is, you can connect outside. You have access to a different whole, struggling for words here, but I can access a spiritual aspect that you can't really access in depth here in the community, where all the wires are, all the Wi-Fi and all that. Up in the mountain, you can access that, and a lot of people, and that's nature, and I think that's our exit, in a manner of speaking, is nature, where you're Truman and you step out of it and you cross the wall, you get out and you step out, and holy cow, there's trees that are actually real. It's, and I could be totally naive in it. I'm not like, what's the word? It's not naive. I get that that's what I'm experiencing. There may be just part of the whole show too, but I do feel a whole lot better. I'll use the word, a hell of a lot better than I do sitting in this city, even with my little capsule here.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, we have 1 more minute left. And this is my guest. I'm Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff, host of Carrying Stones and Digging Holes radio show on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in Studio A. And this has been my guest, Gordon Esau. And I'm lucky because I get to talk to Gord anytime I want. No. And we have many conversations just like the one we had on the show today about many topics. And most of the time they're pretty far out there, which is good because it's always good to have somebody in your life that you can talk to about really far out there stuff. So that you can kind of, get your critical mind thinking and get your wheels turning and figure out, where you're at within, something that's not real and where you're headed and all of those great things.
When you're writing tight to the picture, you don't get to see the whole picture.
Exactly.
Step back, the more of the picture you get to see.
Exactly. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. See you next week and have a great week. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Welcome to Revolution Radio, where you, the listeners, are in charge. Here at Revolution Radio, we present 48 broadcast hours of news and information each and every day. Revolution Radio never sleeps. Revolution Radio is worldwide and borderless information. Revolution Radio is also commercial-free. Revolution Radio is supported 100% by you, the listeners. And that's why we appeal to you to donate and support this station and its expenses. You can support us in many available options like archive subscriptions, our seed pack selections, or even my woodworking store. And we also even have Revolution Radio's swag at the Revolution Radio Zazzle store, in which you can get t-shirts, coffee cups, even a baby onesie. Or you can just plain donate to the cause. We cannot continue without your support, and your support is what helps pay the bills. So please, if you wish us to continue, please stop by our station support page and drop a dime on us. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. Your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation? Is survival and gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns? Do you have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is? Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much, much more, including a surprise bonus we just can't tell you about here. With plenty of room left over to store your most important documents. Imagine if a megavirus or a computer failure took out your bank or all the